welcome everybody to another edition of Hot Program. I am your host with the most, all the way from the East Coast, and as always, folks, I am in airplane mode. And of course, I am joined by my fabulous co-host, a man who, if he was a Catholic, would pray to Yves Saint Laurent, a man who needs no introduction. How are you doing today, my one black friend?
I'm well. I'm going to ask you to read the intro I sent you prior to that because it's way better. Way better.
Let me see. And now a man who, if he met Jesus on Judgment Day, would tell Jesus, wow, you didn't sound black on the phone. A man who needs no introduction.
After yesterday, it's even more appropriate.
Seriously, what happened yesterday?
Well, I was at the museum.
Oh, when you were at the museum with the Russian dolls.
Black Paul, Black Mary, Black disciples.
And of course, we have a very, very special guest with us today. Someone who is an up-and-coming new voice in our community that a lot of us are big, big fans of. The wonderful, wonderful Stephanie Helms. It's so good to have you with us today, Stephanie. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome, Stephanie.
Glad to be here. It's cold, though.
Cold. You said something's going on with your heat. What's going on with the heat?
Yeah, the fuel filter on my monitor heater decided to get clogged up, so it stopped heating. So I had to clean the filter.
That is no good.
And I'm hoping that I did it correctly.
No, fuel filter. It sounds like you're on the East Coast.
I am on the East Coast. I'm in the great state of Maine. It's cold.
The great state of Maine. Okay.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And yeah, it gets cold. I'm in Michigan, and so I'm literally constantly worried about the heat going out, and they need to fix the heater in my place because it's freezing in here, and then I got to rely on the space heaters, and they're kind of a pain. But yeah, we wanted you to join us today. There's a lot going on, and to be quite honest with you, I'm disappointed how much issues of the queer community, LGBT, and especially lately trans issues have just become seemingly everyday political fodder, and it's quite disgusting. And it then becomes something people like Uncle Bobby and myself, other content creators that want to show love and support end up dealing with all the time, but feeling like, one, we're lacking some tools and some resources ourselves because we're coming from a very limited perspective. And number two, we feel the lack of representation from the voices that this issue affects most directly. And at the same time, I know for a lot of people, we just don't know the right people. The well-intentioned white people that I know, quite frankly, in our community, when issues of race come up, they're metaphorically beating down my door, right? They want to know what I have to say, what my one black friend has to say. They're listening to Uncle Bobby, and people recognize when it comes to race, you gotta listen to people of color. When it comes to issues of the queer community, you need to listen to the queer community. When it comes to trans issues, you need to listen to the trans community. And we don't have a lot of voices, but we're fortunate enough to have the ones that we have. And so that was my motivation today, to put together a day to celebrate those voices. And then also I wanted to make it kind of a trans is beautiful thing because I'm tired of having the debate. I want to celebrate the people. I want to hear from them. I want them to be able to tell us their stories, more about them, aside from the trans issue, just who they are, because we want to get to know you. And yeah, that's the motivation. That's why you're here. But before you get going, I just wanted to commend you because you've been popping up on all these panels lately. You've been confronting the bigots in our community. You've had to deal with an incredible amount of prejudice and issues that we have listening to non-male voices on top of all of that. But you've really made a profound impact on people, just in the way you speak to these things. And then you mentioned your sermon, and we checked out that sermon, and I did a whole stream on it because I just said everybody's got to see this. And I'm glad that got your attention, and we're able to have you here as a result. So thanks for all that you do. And yeah, I just want to open it up to you, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, well, thanks for talking. I'm Stephanie Helms. I'm a sailmaker, a professional sailor, and also, strangely enough, a trans woman who transitioned 25 years ago. This month was when I started 25 years ago. Yeah, so I can't speak for the trans community. I can only speak for myself.
Sure.
I think it's very, first of all, I want to point out that according to latest calculations anyway, and the U.S. Trans Survey is, the data is being compiled right now, the most recent one. But best estimates are trans people are 0.5% of the population. And while that's a fair number of people, it's a fairly small percentage of the population. And to me, all of this panic is really unreasonable given the size of the population. As I said, I transitioned 25 years ago. So the voices particularly on the right, but not necessarily, well, the voices that are screaming that this is a new phenomenon, that it's something nobody's ever heard of before 2018. That's, there was a book written that was basic, the transgender craze afflicting our children. It's not a craze, and it's not a phase. It's something that's been with you for a long time. And the fact that state legislatures in the United States, the former guy who took the orange pill, losing their minds over this small number of people who have been with you using common spaces, using appropriate spaces for years and years and years. It's incredible to me that we are being used as a tool to instill fear in people. Mm-hmm. And the people that are instilling that fear are the very people that promise to protect you against the boogeyman, us. Our community, such as it is quite diverse. It ranges from people who have left-wing views, people who have right-wing views, people of color, people like me, white, privileged, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, or of that heritage.
Sure, yeah.
People with a fair amount of money, people who are destitute. But in every circumstance, we're just a wide variety and we're a wide panoply of different folk. And the only thing that we really share in common is this, what I would call peculiar feeling of being out of place, and being out of place within our own within our own frame of movement in the world.
I wonder.
It's,
I was just going to say, I wonder if that makes you kind of uniquely suited to the community building we're trying to do in this sort of atheist space or whatever, because I often feel like it's like herding cats, because we feel like we're low in number. You know, it doesn't seem like there's a ton of us everywhere, right? Which is why we got to use the internet to find each other in the first place. And then because we only share the one thing, which is that we don't believe in God, even, you know, building up our Discord or building up our Gather is incredibly difficult, because as soon as we're not talking about the Bible, philosophy, or religion, you know, it's hard to get people together because we're so diverse under that umbrella. Do you feel in any way like I don't know, do you find a similar thing in that community to where it feels like herding cats when you're trying to do anything that's not about support for the trans identity?
well, yeah, I mean, you know, some people just basically go about their business and continue to, you know, some people aren't comfortable doing what I've been doing, which is to say, trying to explain to cisgender people that we are just people. A lot of people would just as soon keep going, and I'd be comfortable doing that if it weren't for the fact that the what is a recent phenomenon for me is the level of vitriol and the visibility of people who are vehemently opposed to our very existence. That's new. I mean, 25 years ago, I transitioned in place. I didn't move anywhere. I stayed in my community. And that community is, you know, in my life, in my day-to-day life is built around sailing and making sales, selling stuff, just fairly quotidien. But and that community was very accepting. And, you know, look, sailors are people who recreationally sail, are generally well-to-do, fairly conservative, mostly. When I transitioned, there were a lot of people who didn't. Well, the most common reaction was, "Look, I don't understand it. Quite frankly, I don't either."
Sure.
But if this is you, you're you, and we want you to. We don't want you to go away. We don't want to exclude you. I mean, there were issues of, what do we do if she wants to use the bathroom, which is the first thing people think of. It's like, well, we'll let her use the bathroom.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
Problem solved.
Otherwise,
Lunch.
There's no reason for people to lose their minds over that, because most people, when they go to the bathroom, want to go to the bathroom. That's what they want to do.
Well, look, and you're in the homes we grew up in, right? If you had brothers and sisters, you use probably the same bathroom.
Yes.
It seemed to work out fine.
Yes.
I don't recall any wars over the centuries over that one thing.
Yeah, I would always say you grew up with an intersex or intergender bathroom. It just is. Mm-hmm. It was exactly that. Is there an overlap between these two things for you, Stephanie? Because Lena spoke a little bit to this. I don't know if you feel the same way, to where part of I don't know a lot about your deconversion story. Maybe that's something we could ask you about. But did you also feel like, you know, you like what you found here in this community online because it's good for us to have some atheist community or whatever, but as a result now you're constantly dealing with this conversation coming up in this community, and it almost feels like we can't have one without the other, which is a source of constant frustration to me.
I think that the reason we're having this discussion within this community is because a lot of the opposition to queer people generally comes from people of religious background that is very fundamentalist. The constant barrage of God made two sexes and the binary thinking with regard to sex and gender, and the biblical injunction against homosexuals or homosexuality. We're dealing with that in our conversations with religious folks. It always comes up.
How do you? Okay.
To me, I would prefer people didn't feel that they needed, for many reasons. I think society as a whole would be better off if people didn't feel that they needed a God to be good people. That the most important thing is not the afterlife, but this life, and building a better world. But people harbor that belief, can harbor a God belief, maintain a God belief, and still be good people. And people can be atheists and be shitty people. They can have terrible stuff. But a lot of what we're dealing with is the Christian, so in this country anyway, the Christian right, who are hell bent on imposing a rule based on biblical principles as they understand them. And my own background comes from a flavor of Christianity that some would call the social gospel, which is to say you do need to focus on this world.
So Stephanie, can you mention your channel? Actually, you know what? I'll drop a link to it. Someone might have mentioned in the chat that the right seems to think that the trans community is small enough that sort of they can get away with picking on it, and then somebody else said they're sort of relying on the perceived lack of ability to defend yourselves. Do you feel like, because you mentioned the small numbers, do you feel like I often feel like that's deliberately part of it. It's two things. It has to be somebody they feel like they can, it can't be a majority. They can't punch up. They're never going to punch up. And then it also has to be something immutable. It has to be something, where they're going to call it something, but it's got to be something a person can't change, right? That way they'll always be, whatever it is you're going after.
Yeah, well, it is that is the thing that you've lost the gay issue. Really, they've lost the gay.
Sure,
issue.
they lost that one.
Okay.
They can't. Gay marriage is widely accepted.
Right.
They'll still rail against the quote unquote homosexual lifestyle.
Sure.
But that's a loser now.
100%.
They don't have anything. They don't have that as a boogeyman. You can't, and God knows racism didn't go away because we elected a black president once upon a time. But they can't really use that issue. They can't, they still dog whistle around it like, oh, critical race theory, blah, 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 blah. They dog whistle all over the place around it. They're still bigots.
Yeah.
But you can't drive, you can't accomplish what I think they're trying to accomplish, which is, as I said before, creating fear and once that fear is created, become the person that promises to keep the wolf at bay, keep fear away.
Well, that's power.
That's which leads to power.
I think they're extremely good at that. You may remember, Stephanie, there was a time where it was the Smurfs that were demonic, and Dungeons and Dragons and Star Wars action figures.
Yeah.
They were the problem, and you got to roll over, take a bulldozer and run over rock music records and rap records and stuff like that. Again, as long as they can, I'd say, have a boogeyman, if you will. As long as they can have a Satan, an adversary, they can be powerful. As long as you keep those pews filled with people who are frightened, they'll come back. They'll come back in big numbers. And I've heard minister after minister say it when they talk about the goodness of the world and how sweet people are and things like that. The pews tend to empty out. When you talk about hellfire and brimstone, people stay right there. They don't go. So trans issues, though, as you stated, it's a small percentage of the population. For them, I think trans people are the new boogeyman. But since they're used to losing the fight, this is, in my opinion, I wonder what yours is, this is one of the next ones they're going to lose.
I think they will in the end. You know, I do think that it's a losing proposition. But they're doing everything they can to basically say, you hear talk of the trans agenda, our agenda is to just leave us the fuck alone for the most part. I don't want to talk about this stuff. I don't really want to go at it. I mean, I got motivated to speak up for on behalf of trans people basically in 2018 when the Trump administration tried to pass a regulation out of the Department of Health and Human Services to say that sex is immutable and observed at birth, which would take away, which would affect things like identification documents, like passports and healthcare and all of this stuff. Basically saying, and now it's ramped up. So it's okay. Well, think of the children. We can't have children we can't give children access to gender affirming care, whether it's non-medical and strictly psychological or medical intervention. And now it's ramped up to the point where Donald Trump, on his first day in office, he said the other day,
first day in office, day one.
On day one, that's my top priority, is to make sure that all transgender people do not have access to any sort of gender affirming care.
You don't have to worry about that because his healthcare plan alternative to Obamacare is just 2 weeks away. So I think he can stretch that one out for quite a long time and never get anything done. So that's his MO.
Stephanie, I just wanted to say quickly, I hear you when you speak to your reluctance. And I think it's important to say that because I think we rely on your voice and we enjoy your voice, but you have a right to just get up in here and rail against Christianity if that's what you want to do on a counter-apologetic stream, or talk about a politics issue, or, jump in to gather and nerd out about sailing, right? And so I think that's important. It's something that kind of chokes me up a little bit, but it's important that part of what we understand as allies is if your allyship makes you uncomfortable, I really don't care. Because we need to recognize that even the voices that are speaking up saying this is what they're doing to us, they don't want to be talking about this crap today either. And one, we need to recognize them as so much more than that. Like, I've come to get to know Lena, and I can tell you when I think of Lena, I think of, one of the anchors of our community, a great gamer, a shooter, somebody we just, hope to get in on so many things and we consider part of our daily lives. And then as far as her voice is concerned, I think of, that's our anti-fascism captain, right? So to me, you have to go down the list till I get to, and I guess Lena's also gender nonconforming, and yeah, they're great about that too. Right, but it should not have to be the first thing on our list, and I'm acknowledging that your voice has been so great on this, but I really think we all need to, when we're thinking about today's conversation, maybe reflecting on it later, recognize that you've taken the time to tell us you don't like the fact that you have to talk about this thing, right? This isn't what you signed up for.
Well, I'm perfectly happy to. I just wish it wasn't a matter of politics, but it is. Right. It's a matter of self-defense. It's like, and I really want to build allyship. I want people to at least understand that we are just simply people. We're not, we're your brothers and sisters and siblings and aunts and uncles and parents, grandparents, and we're just like you. There's just this one strange little thing that is hard for people to wrap their minds around, and it's hard for most individual trans people have had to fight to be who they are and be themselves and be fully themselves, because it's not widely understood. It's much better understood now. Things were going so well. Mm-hmm. When I was a child, these things weren't understood. I mean, the images of people simply cross-dressing, it was like Milton Berle doing comedy, Flip Wilson doing comedy, Some Like It Hot, that sort of thing.
Think how old that movie is.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And the laws that are getting passed right now would never allow that movie to be made. The Birdcage would never be able to perform it on stage.
Wow.
I have a challenge for you, Stephanie. Let's take the approach that you have an opportunity to sit down with 3 different people from 3 different backgrounds who all are opposed to trans rights. All 3 of them have been on a sailboat and maybe even sailed themselves. So they get what a sailor has to accomplish in the course of making a journey from beginning to end. What analogies to sailing would you offer these 3?
I guess my favorite analogy is, there's the trite expression, we can't control the wind, but we can trim our sails. You adjust. But the other thing is, and I say this to trans people as well, there's no roadmap. It's not a map to transition to a space where you're comfortable in your own skin. It's a voyage. You may have a destination in mind, but there's no highway to that destination. There are lots of ways to get there. And people, there are charts to show you where the rocks are, so you don't go aground, and places to avoid. But otherwise, the ocean is wide, and you can sail it, you can navigate it as suits you best. So that's the analogy that I use a lot. Mm-hmm. With regard to sitting down with people, it's like, I don't know why the sports issue comes up all the time. And I was this was 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I'm trying to remember when that was. I think it was before the pandemic, so I think it was like 2019. And I was running match race regatta in Marblehead. And match race regatta has lots of officials because you have umpires that do on the water calls for watching for people breaking the, violating the rules, calling balls and strikes, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And after the thing, I was sitting down with three judges, three of the umpires. We went out to an Italian restaurant, sat down, had dinner. And one guy got into the whole politics stuff. For some reason or another, he decided it would be a great idea to talk politics, which is maybe, but not necessarily. And he got into the trans people in sport. He was sort of railing on about it's unfair and this and that and the other thing. And I'm sitting there biting my tongue. And finally, after a particularly bad rant, I just looked at him and said, "Have you ever met a trans person?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, you have now." It's like, it was really quite funny.
Wow. In real time. You hit him with it in real time. He wasn't ready. It's an interesting segue, so I'm going to take it because you kind of put it out there. By the way, those analogies were incredible. We can't control the wind, but we can trim our sails, and that it's a long journey, right? It isn't just you don't wake up one morning and make this decision. But the sports thing. Oh, go ahead.
For sure, to wake up one morning.
Yeah.
When I was, when did I come out? At 3.5. The first time I ever told anybody, I told my mom I was a girl at 3.5, and the way in the way a 3.5-year-old would, because it was I had to do some physical therapy because I'd had an accident that burned my foot. And I had to pick marbles up off the floor with my toes so as not to have the scar tissue rope up and cause your toes to go backwards.
Oh, wow.
And so my mom would throw marbles on the floor, and I'd pick them up and put them in a cup, this kind of thing. And after doing that one day, she said, "Good boy," and I said, "No, girl," which freaked her out pretty bad. But it was the kind of thing where I was pretty persistent. And it goes to actually, that's sort of part of what led me away from God eventually was that, why would you do this?
Wow. Okay, I'm trying to keep a pin in some of the things I want to ask you about, but let's go there. Let's talk about your deconversion. Tell us a little bit about that, because like I said, you are a voice in our community that we love what you have to say. And like all people who are fans of, we just like to get to know you a little bit better. And it's especially something when my one black friend and I sat down and decided to do this show, Hot Program, we said we want to really be a place where we shift the focus, right? So much of the focus in this community is on the streamers. Oh, were you at Derek's stream? Did you see the new Bread of Life debate? Blah, blah, blah. But we're getting to know our friends, a lot of times in the live chat, sometimes in these discussions in the comment sections, now a lot of times through these kind of panels and guest appearances. And so we want to use this opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So tell us a little bit about your deconversion story, if you don't mind, and then please tie that ultimately to how you came to participate in these spaces where you're part of our internet community. How did you come to be one of our YouTube friends?
Yeah, well, the deconversion story, as I alluded to, had partially, at least. Let me back up a little bit. I come, as I said before, my religious faith tradition is that of the social gospel, Methodist Church. My grandfather, father, I have an uncle, my brother-in-law, a niece and a nephew, all Methodist ministers. So
That's a lot.
It was hard being a being trans.
Wow.
And being aware of it, and as I say, it's something my parents struggled with.
And you were always aware of it, more or less, right? I mean,
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah, like it. So this had to be early for you. Yeah.
Right. And the it was when I was about 12-ish. I finally gave up. Um, I sort of had well, if this is God's will, then God's a shithead.
Right.
And so I basically went through the motions.
So that's really important because then two things I'm just picking up on here real quick. One, you deconverted a long time before you found this community, which is different than a lot of people. You're not a recent deconvert. And then no. You then spent still a long time within Christian culture even after your deconversion, which I think is also an important part of people's perspective.
Yeah, hard to get away from it,
Yeah, you could take. we used to say you could take the kid out the hood, but you can't take the. You can take the kid out of the hood, but you can't take the hood out of the kid, right? And that was sort of a lot of us with Christianity. You can stop believing, but you can't stop being part of a Christian family and part of a Christian culture and all this type of stuff. Yeah.
And this maybe informs my approach to religious people. It's like I don't care about your God belief, or you're having it, you're not having it. I care about what you do. I care about what your God belief leads you to do. Does it lead you to clothe the naked, feed the hungry, visit prisoners in jail? Does it cause you to do good things on this earth?
That sounds like true religion.
Yeah.
According to the Bible, true religion is those things.
And hang on, real quick. I just wanted to people, just because the chat asked, I want to show people on stream is the way we're set up in Gathers. There's spotlight tiles all over the stage, so that you think of it as a mic'd stage. But if you want to ask a question, people ask if they could ask questions. You come over here to the podium and then you stand on this little orange tile. So just click on this orange tile, and that'll bring you up so that we can hear you on the stage. And if you want, you can just come up on stage temporarily if you're having a hard time with that. But that's what that spotlight tile is there for. Sorry, please continue.
So I know there are a lot of people in the atheist community who take the position. Usually they come out of a real fundamentalist background, and they take the position they're almost more fundamentalist than a fundamentalist. They'll argue with a theist and say, it's a theist who takes that approach and tries to do good, but the atheist will say, yeah, but your book says that we should stone gay people to death. And your book says slavery is okay.
I do this.
Yeah.
You talk about atheists like me. Go ahead.
And I don't know how productive that is. I don't know how, especially if you're trying to convince people to fight against the involvement of state and religion, the institution of an established church, or establishing God's law on earth. No, you don't need to establish God's law on earth. You need to establish justice, work for justice.
Right.
And that includes leaving people the fuck alone, to sit with their belief or lack thereof, and just it's not something that is germane.
Yeah, and that's something we talk about, is that we need all of the approaches. Like, all of us have different takes on how we should deal with religion ourselves, right? As atheists. But part of what I hear with what you say, because part of what I'm trying to do when I do have those conversations, it depends on who I'm talking to, right? A lot of times if I'm talking to somebody who I think is really bigotish or biased, I'm highlighting that. But a lot of times when I'm trying to generate allyship with a religious person, I'm pointing out the text because I'm trying to get them to understand that we have a doctrinal problem in their faith, right? Um, but where I think I'm falling short there is I need to make it clear that I accept and even celebrate that individual person's ability to have their faith beyond that particular bias, right? I'm more looking for help from them. Like, well, what can we do now that now I think you're an ally. I'm with you. You don't hate the LGBT fam, but now what are we gonna do about the fact that this book says this and they keep going to this? But I gotta be sure that when I do that, I'm not being a fundamentalist myself and denying these people the opportunity to grow, right? And
I'll say, just dovetailing over what he's saying, I often use the Bible to really, I guess, sort of Socratically to get them to wake up to what they're saying is truth versus them using their own life experience in their brain to realize, maybe it's not as good of a system as I thought. I'll give you an example. Ezekiel chapter 20, 24 through 26. Because they had not executed my judgments, but despised my statutes and had polluted my Sabbaths, and their eyes were after their fathers' idols. Therefore, this is the key. Therefore, I gave them statutes that were not good and judgments whereby they should not live. And I polluted them in their own gifts, in that they caused to pass through the fire all who open the womb, their firstborn children, that I might make them desolate to the end that they might know that I am the Lord. Okay. So I focus on 25, verse 25. Therefore, I also gave them statutes that were not good and judgments whereby they should not live. I then ask the question, how do you know which judgments were ones that they should not live by? If God is willing to try to make these people destroy themselves, then maybe some of the things that you were taught to believe were wrong aren't wrong. We can agree murder is bad. We can agree rape is bad. We can agree slavery is bad. And yet I can show you in the Bible where each of those things was condoned by its loving God. Yeah. Well, maybe they shouldn't have lived that way, but he's just trying to get back at them, right? Sure. Maybe you shouldn't stone somebody to death for working on the Sabbath or being a homosexual. Maybe those are statutes you should not live by. But this is what God gave them to horrify them.
Well, yeah, and that's the crux of the First Amendment in the United States. I think people say it's a Christian nation. Well, yeah, I suppose to a certain degree, but you had the Puritans in Massachusetts, you had the Quakers in Pennsylvania, you had the Catholics in Maryland, you had the Anglicans in Virginia, you have Methodists in Georgia, and the reason for not establishing a church is because the free exercise of those things would be impinged upon if any one of those faiths, which have very contradictory takes on religious belief, if any one of those faiths were established as the faith, there'd be chaos. And you've got 13 colonies become states. They're trying to forge a nation, and they're certainly not going to say you're all going to be Puritans or you're all going to be Catholics, you're all going to be Quakers. That's the reason for it. That's the reason to keep the state out of religion, is because it inevitably is going to wind up in doctrinal disputes.
Absolutely.
That can't be resolved. They can't be resolved. You can't be, there are Bible thumping fundamentalist Protestants who think that that Catholics aren't Christians. God knows the Mormons don't think anybody's a Christian except for them, you know?
Well, I think a lot of people, especially in modern times, don't realize what a favor that was for them, because now, as it was hundreds of years ago, they can have their faith on their own terms as long as it doesn't harm anyone. But where we've come to today, circling back to one of the topics of today with you, Stephanie, is that now they're using that freedom to take freedom away from other people. They are harming someone with it,
yeah.
Which the Bible is explicit. We're not supposed to do. They're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to walk around hurting each other, hindering each other. We're supposed to have freedom. But I think a lot of the position that fundamentalists today take comes out of a fear of being erased. And part of that fighting that goes on is because they know modern history erases other people. And they're just afraid it can happen to them. And I think they're in for a rude awakening. Maybe not them, maybe their children's children, where the cruelty starts to swing towards whites when they're a minority, and the lessons that had already been learned in this nation through Asians, Latinos, Blacks, Jews, the Polish, the Italians, and people that come from other cultures to come here. When all those lessons, the things we got over, are now forgotten because they were never taught to this new generation who feels, well, why can't we just take it from them? And that becomes the battle cry. Let's just take it away. They can't stop us. Their numbers are too small.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, it's another manifestation of that notion, that authoritarian impulse that comes from the right, primarily. Make them afraid, and then promise that you'll be the good daddy that keeps them away from that takes away their fear and tucks them in nice at night. We'll keep those. We'll be sure that you see that the same kind of rhetoric goes on about the cities are a sewer, the crime, and all of this stuff. It's like, well, if they're not really, I mean, yes, there are problems. There are a lot of people in cities. There's a reason you get a whole bunch of people all in one place. I mean, there are going to be problems, but that's nothing to be afraid of. It's something to address. Not
true.
But the problem. Well, why are people distressed? Well, because they're poor. You've got a lot of poor people. You've got a lot of homeless people. You've got a lot of you've got problems, and those need to be addressed. And to basically just say, to use those problems as, rather than working practically to solve the problems, you're just saying the problems are huge, and my way of dealing with it is more cops, more authority. Just give me the authority, and I'll make sure that the people you don't like trouble you no more.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that. Man, I'm really glad we did this. I've heard so many great things today. I think maybe Sean has a question, so we'll hear from Sean. Sean, can you hear us good? All right, let's see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, Sean, good to hear your voice, man.
Hey Jay, how are you?
Great.
Hi Stephanie,
doing
how are
well.
you?
Hey, good.
Good. We met the other night on one of Richard's streams.
Oh, one of Richard Madsen's streams.
Yeah, which was fun.
Yeah, Sean's at the podium. Appreciate you for using that feature, Sean.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I'm on my phone. So I heard you guys. I caught a little bit of you guys talking openly. And if this isn't the place, or you don't really feel like talking about this, Stephanie, that's totally fine. But the two things that I wanted to mention were, one, at some point I'd love to catch you and gather off air to talk sailing. I have a 2-year plan for a 32 to 40 foot refit. I'm a woodworker.
Cool.
So anyway, and I'd love to talk to you about the ins and outs of that. The what I did catch yesterday from you guys was the sports thing, because that is something that I'm involved in, kind of in a parallel way. And long story short, a couple things that you addressed, something about the Serena Williams comment caught my attention, and there was one other example. And so what the only time that I've seen like trans in sports that it's really affecting things are when we have the so there are trans women athletes out there that have the potential to take a world record and keep it forever. And we've seen that in the swimming, and that was the pushback that we've recently got from like the actual, or from the women community in swimming, right? Like they came in and started to voice their opinion. In ultra running, which is a sport that I've been involved in for a long time, we don't see very much pushback because we're such an inclusive community with everyone. But there is a little bit of pushback within the past couple of years, just because the trans women are starting to come into play, and it's not, it becomes an unfair playing field on some levels, depending on the trans athlete that's coming in, just because we had a recent transitioned athlete come in and was dominating a lot of the sport for a little while in a local area. And there was a little bit of pushback from the women community because there were very few women that could keep up with the trans athlete at all. It was just physically, genetically, it was difficult. And we see that in the cycling community a little bit. And then in the tennis community, when you guys mentioned the Serena thing, to me, a pro, what was I want to get this right. So a friend of mine sells tennis grips for a living. He was a collegiate tennis athlete, and we've had a lot of like trans sports talks, and his point was that any collegiate male tennis player will dominate a women's pro tennis player. And that's not, obviously it's not all of the time, but most of the time. And so when you talk in like the pro athlete world, a trans woman coming on to play at the pro level, it's really hard to compete when it's the one-on-one sports. I just wanted your thoughts on that, because you talked about the sailing, and I don't know anything about sailing, but I think more of like the team sports. Maybe it's a little bit different in the team sports, but I don't know how they're even going to address a lot of like these type of single sports scenario players where. Yeah, sorry.
I just want to add quickly that Stephanie, I was glad you were here to talk to us about sports issues before, and I actually wanted to talk about this. Like this was one of the things I had pinned, was to talk about these issues. And Sean lives in the South, as I understand it, Sean, and these sort of
Georgia
hot button trigger issues are like regularly come up in the conversations he has. So appreciate you, Sean. And Stephanie, I wanted to say this is something I really wanted to hear from you about overall. So take your time.
Hey, Stephanie, one more point. Where I live, it ain't just the Methodist. It's Calvinist, Young Earth creationism, Baptist. They're all. It's all like, oh man.
Freedom, keeping the state out of religion is a damn good idea. It's beneficial to every practitioner of faith,
especially in Georgia.
Because how many? We've got the First Baptist Church. Well, okay, well, we disagree with this guy. We're going to go over and start another church. Now we got the Second Baptist Church, and then you have 12 Baptist churches in the same fucking town. It's silly,
Yeah.
And if you have, if your city council basically says we're going with the First Baptist Church, and what do you do with all these other people? It's cuckoo. Let's don't do that. But to your questions, there's a lot to unpack there. With regard to tennis, there's probably the most famous trans athlete that competed professionally in tennis was Renee Richards back in the late 60s, early 70s, and she medically transitioned. And I think it's important to talk about what happens with medical transition. let's see, we'll back up a little bit. Trans athletes have been able to participate in Olympic sport at the elite level since 2004 without requiring surgery since 2004. But the IOC regulations and World Athletics is the world governing body for track and field, basically. And they from 2004 until until 2021, the IOC had a level that basically said there were no restrictions on men's sport. Anybody can participate in men's sport. So the guys are off the hook. But to compete in the women's division, one had to suppress your testosterone level to, in the IOC's case, under 10 nanomoles per liter of testosterone in your bloodstream. And in World Athletics case, it was 5 nanomoles per liter. And the only people in the women's game that have been excluded from competition, the only people in the women's game in track and field who have been excluded from competition have been cis women.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, like just with low,
specifically Africans,
with just low level, just naturally low.
Well, no, they have high levels.
They have
high levels. They're
naturally,
above.
They're biology.
Oh, they have high levels of testosterone. Sorry, I'm getting the levels thing wrong.
No, and Jay, that's what we talk about when we talk about like a level playing field. And Stephanie, you mentioned that the other day. So in a lot of the sports, they're comparing a lot of the pushback for the trans right. Like men don't care because a trans man rarely, if ever, will be able to even compete in a one-on-one physical male sport like.
What do you do with Chris Mosier then? Because Chris Mosier made a national team.
Stephanie, I know that there are outliers. And that's why I say most of the time there aren't. And again, please don't mistake me for pushing back because there's any antiness going on. My basic position is I want to figure out, well, not me. I'm interested in seeing how it goes over. Like, because what doesn't interest me is like, I think on the development level, sure, let all the kids do what they want and integrate and that's fine. But where we're seeing the pushback in my community is from an elite level athlete or on the pro athlete when it's in a single category of like the track and field. And the only pushback we're seeing I've been out of this actual conversation for a couple of years from the last time we had it, but it was the only person that can push back is that second place. So like, or I'm sorry, not second place, but it's the female. If there's a trans woman athlete that takes third place in the Olympics, the only person that can contest anything is fourth place. Is that right? Is that correct on the Olympic level, Stephanie? That's the way that works. The only people that can push back is the person that finishes directly in the place behind the trans athlete. So let's say women want to be inclusive and all of this stuff. And then you have like the swimming. This is just a better question. What do you think of the swimming example when we have someone like, and I don't know the trans athlete's name, but someone like that, Leah Thomas, that comes in and is literally jeopardizing a woman, or the pushback from the pro athletes or the pro women athletes were literally saying we may never be able to touch this record again because we're not like
first of all,
sure,
it wasn't a record.
Close to it. It was
Okay.
real
No.
close.
Do you know what you know how much faster Katie Ledecky swam the 500 than Leah Thomas?
No, I don't.
2
No,
minutes.
ma'am, I don't.
2 minutes.
Yes. It wasn't anywhere close to a world record.
Okay.
Leah Thomas won a competition. She also, in that meet, she also lost, I believe, 4 of her events in that meet. So that, you know, it seems like you want to have the situation where let the trans athletes lose.
Yes, I completely see that, and I gotta admit, this is one of the things that I've had my own discomfort with, because I've been on that tip before, right? Where I've said this is a real problem because you have someone who, you know, is, you know, dominating female athletes, and female athletes push back. And then when I realized how much these sort of trans sports issues were, to me, used as distractions, I treated them like the bathroom thing. Like, I don't even want to have this conversation because you're not trying to help trans people. You're trying to have some dumb political red herring side conversation. So I don't want to talk about bathrooms, and I don't want to talk about middle school swim meets. I don't want to talk about track and field races, because the issue is we're trying to help trans people, not figure out who can use which restroom. Those are all distractions. When I heard you talking, I said, Jay, you done fucked up. Because sports is an integral part of life and development, and we need to address the issue of how people participate. And I've been overlooking this critical issue because I felt like the well was poisoned. But that's why I think that's probably where Sean is coming from too.
Well, Jay, it's
is
also
we're trying to figure out how to respond to this.
If I could just go on with a little
go
bit of
ahead.
history.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I take the point. The trans athletes are only a problem when they win.
I do see that. It seems to be happening.
That's one point. But let me talk to what World Athletics and the IOC decided to do.
Sure.
In November of 2021, they decided to leave it to the individual sports. And the framework, there was a framework published with 7 points, and I don't have the let's see, maybe I do have it close to hand as to what the 7 points are.
Take
As
your
I
time.
listen to this,
I don't anyway, but you know,
Okay.
you can Google it. You can look for the IOC guidance on the principles of fairness. And first of all, it starts out with I think it's item 3 in the International Olympic Committee Charter, which says sport is a human right. Okay, so the principle should first be inclusion. Unless it can be through peer-reviewed research demonstrated that there is a risk to safety, to athlete safety. There is a risk to the fairness of the competition, and we're talking about peer-reviewed research. Not the
middle school newspaper.
And certainly not the whether a particular athlete wins a particular match or excels in some particular field. In tennis, with Renee Richards, she sort of middle of the road tennis player. She wasn't, she did play professionally a bit, and she had medically transitioned. Well, but to the regime prior to this decision on the part of the IOC to basically kick it to every single, each individual sporting federation as to who gets to qualify. The restriction was lower testosterone levels.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is research that probably a really good study was one that was conducted by the U.S. Air Force that evaluated people's performance. This is not elite level stuff. This is just, if you're in the military, you have a fitness test every year, and they tracked the performance of trans members of the service vis-a-vis specifically women, and both women and men, trans women and trans men, and compared the performance to cis women, cis men. They found that in that particular study, they found that that trans men achieved performance levels similar to cis men after a year and a half, I think, of gender affirming hormone therapy. Trans women approach the levels of cis women in almost all categories except for one, and that was they seemed to have a marginally better performance after 2 years of gender affirming hormone therapy, which is to say the suppression of testosterone and administration of estrogen after about 2 years. And the one place where it seems like they had a marginal advantage was in running. Now, in terms of upper body strength, you lose that. You lose that really fast. The other thing that really happens incredibly fast, like within 6 months, is that the VO2 levels and the blood's capacity for carrying oxygen in a trans woman drops to cis women's levels of hematocrit, the stuff that carries the oxygen, within 6 months of hormone replacement therapy and testosterone repression. So that means that, okay, physical stuff, by and large, you can talk about males tend to have a larger heart, larger lung capacity, and all of this sort. But that's by and large. It's not by, you say it's not
some overlap.
Yeah, there's overlap here. I mean, sex itself is not, it's a bimodal distribution. It's not a binary, really, in a lot of ways. But that means that even if you did have a larger heart, and even if you did have a larger lung capacity, even if you did have a larger frame, you wouldn't be able to get oxygen to that larger frame. It'd be like putting a motor design, a 4-cylinder motor in a Mack truck, and expecting the truck to perform.
Right.
I mean, that's somewhat extreme, but it's similar. You get the idea.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There are physiological changes that occur, and the reason they occur is because genetically, genes get expressed in the presence of their environment. So no testosterone, no bulking up. I mean, which is why, like, hormone puberty blockers, hormone suppressants are gonna make someone who's going through puberty, if they start a regime of actual hormone replacement, they'll develop just like a cis, just like a cis girl.
Sure. So,
So it's not, when you talk about genetics, the genes need to be expressed, and the genes are, the genes will do what the genes will do in the presence of, oh, I see some estrogen here, oh, I see some testosterone here, and that's where things branch off. So
Stephanie,
does any of that make any sense?
absolutely.
Do you think it's where do you think, like, where do you draw the line, Stephanie? Or is there a line at all? Or like, how do you see the integration of all trans athletes into sports?
Well, again, I think if you stick with the principle of it needs to be demonstrated that that there is either a threat to safety or a threat to even competition. And if you look at, particularly at the elite level, it's you already have a real world study. It's been since 2002. I don't know how many Olympiads that is. Divided by 4, whatever. Throughout that entire period, only 2 trans athletes have made a national team. One of them is Chris Mosier. The other one is Laurel Hubbard. And only one, that'd be Laurel, has made it to the games. And even if you account for the 0.5%, you would expect to see a lot more. How many there are, like 500 athletes at an Olympic event, you'd probably expect to see, well, even if it's not 0.5%, and 0.5% of the sample, you'd expect to see like a few. But in the space of from 2002 to 2020, you have 2 that have even made a national team. I mean, we're not seeing domination. We're seeing individuals who, by virtue of taking an inclusive approach, when you talk about outliers, I'd say Leah Thomas is an outlier.
Oh, I agree. And I think at some point very soon, hopefully we'll have more integration, right? Because we're only seeing on the Olympic level very small percentages, but we're starting to see it on elite levels, like in states. And so when we sit around a table talking to trans athletes, women, all athletes, right? So when you just sit around, the conversation typically goes to like, how is this going to go in the future once we once trans athletes are integrating in a bigger capacity? Like, how is that going to work? And these are just conversations.
Yeah, well, it unless you take the position that a trans athlete should never win, that's somewhat antithetical to the notion of competition, because nobody goes into a contest to lose. I mean, I don't get on a sailboat expecting that I'll be second.
Well,
I expect to win.
Correct. I just meant, like, how do you, like, the typical conversation sitting around the fire after a mountain bike race or a cycling race or running race or something that we've had as a whole community, including trans athletes, women athletes, male athletes, trans male athletes, just all athletes, is typically how it's going to go. And you've been the first person that I'd come across in our community that had some real experience on an Olympic level or been involved in your community as far as like an official level, because we typically don't get to have that conversation. And I think when you have that with a lot of like officials, it's politicized to a point that it's hard to just like sit down by the campfire and say, hey, how's this going to play out? Like, what do you think of this? And these things, even from trans athletes that I know. A good friend of ours is a mountain biker here in Georgia that transitioned about 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And she had great results in the mountain biking community and for a long time, but she her difficulties were a little bit different being in Georgia and wanting to feel part, and most of the community came to be inclusive, but there were, certain outliers of the community being in Georgia. Like, I think that she got a little bit of pushback.
I guess did she win every race or did she win a few?
Well, so
did she win, or did she do well? Do
poorly? She did very well. She waited for a couple years after she transitioned to start racing, and not at an elite level, but at a on a lower
club
yes
sport level.
Yes, ma'am, exactly. Dominated for like 2 years, and then she doesn't really race too much anymore because there was a little bit of pushback, and it wasn't so much from her winning, but just the inclusivity. Like, she didn't feel as welcomed as she wanted to, so she does other things now. So she went back to like running, and she does it, and that was like the pushback. It wasn't due to like, hey, I'm dominating the sport and people were like, fuck you for winning in anything. It was literally like she didn't feel as welcome in that sport as she did the ultra running community. So I think she went back to the ultra running community, which is very well. I think most of the communities on club levels are absolutely welcoming, and I think that's where you have a realistic conversation of how do we integrate, like, and forgive me, I don't mean this to be offensive, but a new
I think maybe he dropped off there. Yeah, I think so. He may be in and out. Part of what I'm hearing, Stephanie, at least what I've been guilty of, is having the wrong conversation.
Pushback from like a local community, and for me, the biggest pushback we've seen are by women that are maybe worried now about like the integration or competing, and I think a little bit of that is just like the newness of it all, right? Because like you like to often say, Stephanie, and I love these two things that you say, and then I'll dip out and let you guys go back at it. But the one is, outside of sports, for me, and a couple other arenas, it's a matter of fucking politeness. And if you can't be courteous or polite to a fellow human, go fuck yourself. But and then the other is like, it's such a small issue, but our politics are just so caught up and rolled up in this in the trans community to the point that it really is. And where I live, it's terrible because I'm like, who the fuck, what gay person do you know? Like, I mean, like, we know because we have gay friends, but like, what gay person do you know? To the people that are pushing back against this, like, and I think that is a problem, right? They don't have gay friends, they don't have trans friends, they don't have black friends, they don't have any other friends than their fucking white country ass fucking conservative Christians, and that's tough, right? Well, I don't mean that, but that's typical for where I live, and that's not to say they're not wonderful people up here, but they're just so ignorant to the world. I mean, even my wonderful partner in life, when she came out of Christianity, it was because she started running with a gay friend of ours, and she and Kat ran together. She met her partner Jill, and they all became great friends, and she literally bounced out of like, it's Pentecostal, but she bounces out because she's like, what God could send these two women to hell for loving each other?
Oh, I love that story, Sean, because I'm always complaining about how not enough Christians let that be the deal breaker. Not enough of them go to it. Wait, what did this passage say about my LGBT fam? Oh, yeah. Me and Christianity's last day was yesterday.
Jay, one last
go ahead.
One last thing, and I'll mute for a bit and just listen. So on the note of Sarah, she'll tell you before she came out of it, she believed if she didn't pray before she went to bed that she'd end up fucking in some fiery inferno of hell. That's how indoctrinated, that's how like strict Pentecostal she was. If she didn't pray, she felt like so guilty and so miserable and so anxious because of that. I mean, like,
yeah, I absolutely.
Anyway, when we're in Gather, I'll tell you about that.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate you, Sean.
Hey, thanks for letting me talk, guys.
Thanks for discussing the other critical race theory.
Sean
and Stephanie, I want to meet up and Gather at some point or somewhere because I want to talk to you about the sailing thing at some point.
Sure. Well, also, Sean, I just wanted to say, don't forget, we'll be in this cafe tonight for movie night. We'll be in here really around the clock today, but
cool.
We'll start the movies around 9:00, so everyone can join us. The link's in the description.
Awesome. I'll see you.
All right, we'll see you later. So, Stephanie, go ahead. I'll let you respond to anything you wanted to there before we move on.
Well, yeah, just to wrap up, it's a little bit anyway. I'm sure the issue will be addressed. I can
Yeah,
talk to
sure.
I can talk to sailing anyway. It's
Sure.
I want to make this point.
Yeah, yeah.
You need to compare a lot of the studies that people who are vehemently opposed to trans participation in sport tend to cite studies that compare men to women across the board.
Right, right.
They don't compare trans men to cis men, trans women to cis women. The assumption starts with trans women are men, and you take it from there. So that's what, you can't be doing studies that compare the average man to the average woman. You can't do that.
Yes.
You need to compare.
We're bringing a heteronormative bias into a conversation that isn't about those people to begin with.
That's right. And I think that on a scholastic level, you're not providing hormone therapy to children. So if there's an identity issue there, then the kid ought to be able to play. If there is hormone replacement therapy involved, then you need to look at results. I mean, the poster child when this whole shit first blew up was up for the poster child for scaring people to death about trans people in sport was Mac Biggs, a trans boy in Texas that won the girls' championship in wrestling. Well, there's a reason. It's because she was taking testosterone as part of transition. This is when she was like a junior, senior in high school. She and the state of Texas made him wrestle girls because your gender assigned at birth says F here, so you're going to wrestle girls. And he didn't want to wrestle girls; he wanted to wrestle boys.
Right, because if we affirmed the gender, he would have been able to compete against males.
Correct.
So they exclude him from male competition by forcing them to participate in the sport as assigned at birth, then use that against that person when they win, when that's, oh man, that's crazy. That is wild.
He's a trans boy, he's a trans guy.
Right.
And he doesn't want to, didn't want to be wrestling girls. He wanted to be wrestling the men's division and boys division. So, but
so they create the boogeyman that they're trying to scare us of. That is deep. And we're still seeing the same playbook. Wow.
And it's won the state championship. It's like, well, but the outcry was as if, the literal, there's a photograph of Mac, winning a match, and there's this poor girl on the ground and looking like she's crushed, and she literally was. So, she's wrestling after all.
Right.
But here's this guy beating this girl, and it was as if, well, first of all, Mac was assigned female at birth, and the only reason he was wrestling was because the state of Texas insisted that he had to wrestle girls because he was assigned female at birth. And then they turn around and use that as a poster. It's like, we can't have boys wrestling girls. Well, I would agree. Probably not a good idea.
Wow. So that's a really powerful example. I do have to go in about 20 minutes. So A couple things I wanted to ask you about, just because you had mentioned, and thank you again so much for doing this. And I know we've been throwing a lot at you, so thanks for your patience with all that. But you had mentioned the importance of surgery, and the example you were given before, and you didn't quite finish that thought. I wanted to give you opportunity to finish making that point.
Well, I don't think surgery per se is a big deal necessarily. I don't think it's a big deal. I think that the more important thing is what's running around your bloodstream, and when it comes to athletics anyway. And I think that, you know, the physiological changes, what's between your legs is not, you know, it's not a it's not a performance advantage.
Oh, so was that your point about the surgery, that we shouldn't be using the surgery as the factor that we're necessarily thinking about determinative?
I don't think it's determinative.
I see.
I think if you're suppressing testosterone to like most trans women have T levels. Trans women who are on HRT have testosterone levels way under 5 nanomoles per liter, and you know, they're well within the normative female range. Like you know, my testosterone levels are very, very, quite a bit. It's under 1 nanomole per liter. So, you know, and that's a function of you know, I've fully transitioned, so quote unquote. And but even with testosterone suppressants, cyperterin or spironolactone or something, you're going to get to T levels that are really, really low. And the physiological changes are really quite stark. I mean, I had to relearn everything in my sport. I had to get rather than relying on upper body strength in you know, trimming a jib, you know, winching in a sail or something like that. I had to rely on timing far more, and finesse far more than just brute strength, because the upper body strength just goes away.
Wow. My one black friend, I want to make sure you get in here and get any questions you have before I have to go.
I made a list of questions.
All right.
We're going to go back to the beginning of the conversation with this. What is your advice to parents that experience what your mom did when you, as a 3-year-old, expressed that you were a girl?
Great question.
Well, had I been born in, say, rather than 1953, 1993 or 2003, there would have been resources out there. There's been a lot of there's been a lot of history and study within the medical profession, and within the mental health field, within and within the medical field, and there are more practitioners who have dealt with the subject of either gender dysphoric children or trans kids generally. When I was small, there was basically one guy in the United States. Harry Benjamin was the only guy who was really focused on trans people, and his, you know, his understanding was limited as well, because, you know, he's a pioneer in the field. So what I would say to parents is listen to your kid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just listen to your kid and see, you know, talk about it. if you're particularly for a small child, it's if there is transition involved at all, it's strictly social transition,
not physical.
Yeah. You mean physical? The physical changes don't happen until you hit puberty, and which is why puberty blockers are a thing. It's like, okay, we'll put this on pause, until you feel certain.
Sure.
I mean, my experience of puberty was awful. It's just awful. It's just horrible. And you see your body changing in ways that are not right.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's really important. I just want to say quickly that I think we're having the wrong conversation about so many of these things. With sports, the thing that really hit me about what you said is, people are on top of this and they're thinking about it, and our first priority needs to be inclusion. And instead, to me, we're starting the conversation by trying to find reasons to come up with an excuse to exclude certain people, rather than start with inclusion. And if they're not harming anybody, and there's no evidence to suggest that this is destroying the sport, which should come from the authorities and the researchers, then we need to change the focus to be inclusion. Same way when it comes to trans care, we need to focus on how do we support people who need to transition or need to delay certain things, because our concern should be for their suffering, so that people don't have to experience what you had to experience when you were coming up. I just wanted to highlight what you said. Appreciate that. Before my one black friend, I'll let you go to your next question, I guess.
Thank you. How do people make your life harder?
By passing laws,
By
introducing 150 plus bills, and to basically to take away rights we've already had. This is not a fight to overturn Jim Crow. This is a fight to stop the enactment of laws that would make life impossible. Like, I don't want to be running around. I don't know as women would be comfortable with a trans man in the John with them. I don't know I know I wouldn't be very comfortable using the gents any longer. First of all, it's inconvenient, although there'd probably be more of opportunity to sit down and pee, because the stalls are more open than they are in the ladies' room.
Yeah.
But in day to day, it's not after a certain period of time, one gets comfortable in one's skin. You just sort of walk through life and you're happy. It's good. It's fine. But when people deliberately, like the gentleman who was going on about who went off on a political tangent about trans people, and how he was from Texas, by the way. And how trans people are terrible. And it's like, well, have you ever met one? No. Oh, okay. Well, you have now.
Right.
That's the kind of thing
Right.
The thing that makes it difficult for trans people is the climate, of just asking questions and all of this malarkey. That is, it's, first of all, shouldn't it be a question when it comes to any sort of medical or psychological intervention? These are matters that are intensely personal.
Absolutely.
And intensely focused on the individual involved and their physicians or caregivers, their families, their communities. So to the extent the community interposes its will out of prejudice, out of just, well, that's impossible. I just said That's
Right,
a
right,
problem.
right.
And the problem for a kid like me growing up was I was the impossible girl. That's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
That was the answer that I got. No, that's impossible. No, you're a boy. And this is impossible. I mean, I got dragged off to, I don't want to get too personal about this, but I got dragged off to see an endocrinologist at the age of 11 because of differences of sexual development, DSD. And and I was being, I was, junior high school was rough for everybody. It was really, really, really rough for me. So, when people do know your history and insist on dead naming you or misgendering you, that's a problem. But it's a problem one lives with. I mean, man.
No, I
Okay.
appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have that many questions. I hope they're
Okay,
good ones.
I'll let you
though.
go.
Thank you. Did you feel as a preteen that your body was, well, actually, you can identify like what age that it really sunk in. If you felt this way, did you feel that your body was betraying you? And if so, how did you reconcile that emotionally?
Well, puberty's the kicker. It was fine. It was fine, but I felt uncomfortable as a smaller child. But when puberty hit, it was just devastating. It was like when my voice cracked and changed and all of that stuff. And when you should be happy, you're not. It's like, oh well, you're growing up, and it's like, but I'm not. And it was just wrong. It just felt wrong. And how do you reconcile it? Well, at the time, you just have this, and I guess the best way of putting it is an intense sense of regret and resignation, because at the time there weren't the resources. Like you're wrong to feel this way. You're the impossible girl. It's impossible. But it is possible. It's not. And the fact that it's possible, the fact that people want to make it impossible to return to those days and to return to that attitude is something that is bad. But as far as reconciling it, it's like I did my best. I did my best, my very level best to play the role of boy, then play the role of man, and it just didn't work. Eventually it just all collapsed.
Wow.
Okay. I don't know if this is a tougher question or not. What advice would you have for someone who felt they should transition, but also wanted to have children?
Well, there are, there are ways to preserve. One could bank sperm, bank eggs. There are ways to. There's the possibility of adoption. There's there are ways around that. If fertility is a concern that you want to pass on, that you want to have a person genetically related, genetically close to you, you would preserve your gametes in some manner or fashion and figure out how to make that work.
All right, thank you so much. We've got to go in the future. So, my one black friend, do you have any other questions? Like, I want to make sure you get an opportunity to ask a couple more if you need.
Thank you. I think that's it, because a lot of the things I wrote down, like, you've already covered, so it wouldn't be necessary. I guess. Well, let me change the question.
Sure.
The question was, what do you wish people understood about you? I'm gonna flip that on its head. What do you wish people understood about themselves when they're trying to, I guess, stand in the way of you having equal rights?
I wish people would reflect on the need for empathy. As hard as it is, it's very, very hard to, it's hard for people to take into consideration the the broader aspects of any other person's life. But empathy is so critical, and I wish that people would find in themselves that capacity, and just reflect before they have a knee-jerk reaction to the struggles and the struggles another person is facing, and also appreciate their another person's joy. I mean, empathy goes all over the place.
Yeah.
Appreciate the happiness that people have achieved or could achieve in being themselves. It just have a little bit of care and empathy and concern about another person's life, and learn. I mean, my feeling is that people come in all different sizes, colors, flavors, etc., and so forth, and that's the broad fabric of humanity. That's a part of the human experience. Even if it's a part of the human experience that it's not understood, try. Don't other people to the point where you're excluded from. You're willing to exclude somebody from full participation in society because of who they are.
All right. So,
Thank you.
yeah, no, seriously wonderful. Yeah, we'll wrap in a minute. Stephanie, I want you to just have a moment to just take the floor, because we've been kind of asking you questions. So anything you want to say or speak to for a couple minutes, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just want to. I want to thank you first of all for having me here.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been great.
And come sailing.
Come sailing, yeah.
It's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of joy for me.
I had a question about sailing. And I'll tell a quick story of my own. I want you to tell us something about sailing that would not strike us as people who don't sail. And the example I was thinking of is, as a drummer, I think people don't understand that you're very vulnerable when you're on stage because you're in front of hundreds or potentially thousands of people, and you form this intense bond with the people you play with, and it's a result of being exposed together. And that so much of what you're really doing when you're practicing and you're working hard all week is you're trying to provide safety for your bandmates. Like, we're going to be exposed, we're going to be vulnerable as crap. I got to have it all together because my band's counting on me to anchor them down. And it's a safety obligation. Like, literally, if I'm not prepared, we are going to be unsafe, and things can go tragic in front of a lot of people. And you might not think about that when you're just watching drummers do their thing. So what's something about sailing that I don't get because I just don't do it?
All right, well, for me, the most wonderful part of sailing is it's quite zen, and it's also, unless you're sailing a laser, a single-handed boat like a laser or something like that, you are working as part of a team, and it's dangerous. It's fucking dangerous. The water's over your head most of the time.
Wow.
You don't want to. You need to be cognizant of the safety of yourself, of your crew, of the soundness of the vessel you're sailing. You don't want to be, and it's also incredibly zen. It's the sport. You have to be attuned to puffs of wind to trim the sails correctly. You need to be attuned to the shifts of wind in order to get the boat to go in the most efficiently in the right direction.
Right.
You need to, you need, it's a sport that requires being in the moment all the time.
Yes.
And
yes.
aware of the, again, the condition of the vessel, the condition of the seas, the conditions of the wind. You just need to be minute to minute, second to second in tune with what's going on in that moment.
That's dope.
And make guesses as to what's going to happen in the next minute or two. You know.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For those of us that are still in Gather, feel free to hang out. We're going to shut down the YouTube stream. Please don't forget that we're going to do a movie night. If you do want to dip out and come back, we'll start the movie around 9:00 p.m. and we'll be hanging out and Gather probably over in the little cafe area. But before we go, my one black friend, you had something?
You know, it was a sailing thing from my perspective. I've been in like a little 3-person sailboat on one of the quietest ponds that you're ever going to see. And I've been on a real sailboat out on the ocean, and there's quite a difference. Quite a difference.
Yeah.
The pond aspect of it was just enjoyable to drift along, and it didn't feel like work. Where when I was on the big sailboat on the ocean, I didn't have to do anything on the boat, but just enjoy where I was. But the people around me were busy working, caring for our safety. As you pointed out, it is dangerous. And they were doing everything to make it pleasurable. Those folks had learned to take the wind, which can be against you sometimes, and use it to get where they're going. Yeah. And they took other people with them on that journey. So I think any of us, we can all remember that whatever our journey is in life, we're being propelled, if you will, by time. We don't get a choice. Unless you take yourself out, you don't get a choice. It's all going to keep moving. So if you master the art of using that to your advantage, and you further master it by being able to take people with you on the journey, you're really doing it well.
That's right. You can't control the wind, but you can trim your sails. That's it for us. As always, folks, be good to yourselves.
And each other.
Come join us and Gather. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In the name of the Darwin, the Dawkins, and the Christopher Hitchens, science bless you all.